And I could see quickly that when you read the Elohim stories as stories of the powerful ones, you're reading a summary form of the Sumerian, Babylonian, Akkadian, and Assyrian stories about sky people. And it suddenly makes sense of a whole load of storylines in the Hebrew canon in which you have powerful ones going to war against each other and thousands of human beings being slaughtered in that conflict. So you realize that you're looking at a world with a spectrum of different kinds of powerful entities. And I stress different kinds. There is a body called the Sky Council in the Hebrew canon, what Hayam Ashed called an intergalactic federation. He was the brigadier general who for 27 years was the chief of space security for Israel. And he said on the basis of his work, he believed that we are currently in contact with an intergalactic federation, again, implying a spectrum of entities. That story is thousands of years old. So now you reframe the stories of the Old Testament, the Hebrew scriptures, in a henotheistic light. And henotheism is the idea that there are many gods, but you serve this one. And that certainly frames a lot of the storylines. So you get to the Ten Commandments, and it's very clear there are other powerful ones out there, but you are not to talk about them, you're not to serve them, you're not to work for them, don't even depict them. Forget they're there, serve this one, serve Yahweh only. So right then and there, you realize Yahweh fits into this, population of powerful beings. He's one of them. And it makes sense now when you get to the story of Yahweh being very jealous of the powerful one of Ekron, when some of his human beings go off to consult him. And he says, is there not a powerful one here you could consult, that you go to the powerful one of Ekron? And there's this peer-to-peer competition going on. Suddenly it makes sense. Yahweh is one of the Elohim. And so the picture emerges of a time when human beings were governed by entities that were not human, and each of these entities had their own colony of human beings. Now you get to Jesus. How does he relate to that? A lot of Christians who read the Bible will have noticed and perhaps been puzzled by the fact that Jesus does not talk about Yahweh. He doesn't teach people to worship Yahweh. Why isn't he using that name? Why isn't he using the holy name?
So here we have a conflict all of a sudden.
So there's a big question. And then why didn't he unambiguously validate the Hebrew scriptures? Because he didn't. You get to Acts 15, and the early church is wrestling with the question of what do we do with the Hebrew canon? Do we have to believe in it? Do we have to obey it to be Christians? And the council in Acts 15 is headed up by Jesus's brother James, and the apostles are present, all the senior leaders are present, and they conclude, no, faith in the Hebrew canon is not a prerequisite for Christianity. We've moved on. And yet somehow the early church glued the Hebrew scriptures onto the apostolic teachings to make a Bible of Old Testament and New Testament, confusing people for the next 2,000 years. But in the beginning, the church leaders were very clear. Jesus isn't building what he started on the Hebrew canon. He didn't endorse the Elohim stories. He didn't endorse the Yahweh stories. He didn't endorse the 6th century BCE edit that turned all that into God's story. And without that being obvious and clear, they could not have made the decision they did. And once you fully process that, you can go back and see points where Jesus is deliberately downgrading the Yahweh stories and turning people away from them. And the most dramatic example of that is a moment where he's teaching about prayer. And Jesus says, what kind of father would give their child a stone? If their child is hungry and thirsty, what kind of father would give them a stone? If their child asked them for fish, what kind of father would give them a snake? Now that, to a lot of readers, is a bizarre thing for Jesus to say. Why would he come up with such a perverse scenario as that? And the answer is he's referring to a Yahweh story, or to two moments in the Yahweh story, where that is exactly what Yahweh did. His hungry and thirsty human beings were suffering in the desert. They'd been on emergency rations for goodness knows how long. They were having problems because of lack of access to safe drinking water. What does Yahweh do? He gives them a stone, and Moses has to get water from the stone. When they say, we can't live on this emergency ration forever, can we have some proper food, please?